Okay, now I know this is, wandering off into speculation territory, but based on all your experience watching Iran, watching the region, what do you think their retaliation will look like?
I certainly think April 13 set an important benchmark. And during that attack, the regime launched three different types of munitions directly from its territory. One were suicide drones, the famous Delta Wing Shahed class drones, which, as you know, the Russians are using in Ukraine. The 131 and the 136, those are two variants of basically kamikaze low and slow flying drones propelled by a piston. That's one. Two is land attack cruise missiles. The regime didn't fire many of these, but this is basically a much more effective munition that flies, parallel with the surface of the earth. And then one missile that goes high and fast, ballistic missiles. And the regime mostly fired liquid-fueled ballistic missiles. I think the April 13 attack sets an important benchmark and baseline for us to understand, because that, in my view, was the regime pressing the gas and the pedal at the same time. Remember, there was a 12-day public lead-in where even outlets like CBS News were able to guess the exact weapons Iran would be using. The regime was taking them out of storage, fueling them, leaving them there, reportedly telegraphing the attack. I think we may have a much shorter window today, plus one additional complicating factor, which is that because it was the head of Hamas killed in Iran, and because it was a major Hezbollah operative killed in Beirut, you're likely going to have other elements from this Iran-backed axis of resistance join in as well. And if about 100 ballistic missiles and I don't know how many, 150, 200 drones were insufficient to overwhelm Israeli and allied air and missile defenses before, perhaps further layering that attack with something from Iraqi Shia militias, the Houthis in Yemen, Hamas in Gaza, or Hezbollah in Lebanon. So I think you're likely going to have multi-front participation. This is a phenomenon the Israelis call unification of the fronts, as something that we know they've long feared and worried about. And it'll mean that if the U.S. is going to perform the same role it did in the past, and we have comments from Secretary of Defense Austin that hint that the U.S. would do this already, we're going to have to surge in more assets, have really great ISR, and then also do more than just engage in deterrence by denial, in my view. We may actually have to engage in deterrence by punishment, because if the regime thinks it'll keep winning these rounds, it'll continue moving out of the shadows and become a more effective hybrid warfighter.
Do you think the current administration, the Biden administration, would take direct action, meaning aside from providing munitions and resource support, intelligence support, would they take direct action against Iran?
All else equal, I think not. And I don't believe that's just my assessment. I think that's the assessment of Hassan Nasrallah, the Secretary General of Hezbollah. I think he's even said this in the past, that, the Americans will be restraining Israel. The Iranians haven't said it this directly, but it's baked into their assumption. And that is quite worrisome because, constantly engaging in this much more expensive architecture of deterrence by denial, well, that means the adversary is really only losing the value of the missile or the rocket or the mortar or the drone that they fire. But if you kind of academically threaten that which they hold dear, then, you could be able to, flip the script on them, if you will. But I think it's unfortunately Iran and the allies of Iran, this axis of resistance, this correct understanding of not just this Biden administration, but three different administrations trying to push away from the region, and the ability of our adversaries to read that and to take the title of Michael Hayden's book, Playing to the Edge, to play to the edge on that is what really got us in this scenario. There are some kind of conspiracy theorists and people who say, well, the strike may have been done by Israel to drag the U.S. into a conflict. I don't necessarily see that. This is something the Israeli political leadership promised to do right after October 7, which was to go after the Hamas political and military leadership.